So thanks for joining me, everyone. We're quite excited today to have this great panel for Financial Inclusion Week. We're really going to look at a different angle on climate smart data and how it can unlock financial services. My name is Hetal Patel, Director of Investments with Mercy Corps Ventures, and I'm grateful to be able to kind of lead this panel, or really just add some questions and let our experts share some of their experiences. I'll start with just some basic context. We're really living in an unprecedented level of data availability, data that enables startups and their end users to adapt to climate change, avoid threats, and capture new opportunities. As connectivity increases, data quality, availability will usher in new opportunities and climate smart technologies. Some of our work at Mercy Corps is focused on this. We're currently undergoing a climate smart data series that will be released at the end of the year, early next year. But today we're really here to hear from our panelists on their experiences and where they think the past has brought us to where we are and where we may be able to unlock opportunities. And so I'm going to get started with some introductions. And so I'll give it over to you, Bessie, first.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for pulling this group together. By way of quick introduction, I'm Bessie. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of FloodBase. I have been working on the science behind FloodBase for almost 10 years now, and that has gone through many evolutions along the lines of what I think we'll be discussing today. But today, the company is an end-to-end data solution for a new form of climate insurance called parametric flood insurance, specifically focused on flooding. And parametric insurance is where payouts are made remotely, sometimes automatically, by some kind of external data parameter. Now, but just quick background, flooding is the most common and costly disaster. Even in just the past few months, we have seen the results of this from things like the death count now well over 10,000 in Libya. We've seen this in unprecedented places across the United States. And then when you see these events, you know what it means, what it looks like, what it feels like for someone not to have resources after the fact, either through government support or from their own community, to be able to bounce back, avoid falling into poverty, avoid bankruptcy. So this is the challenge that FloodBase has really been focused on meeting with our partners within insurance, within broker companies, and within bankings. So what we do is create a continuous map of flooding happening anywhere in the world. Any hour in the United States, we're constantly monitoring, any day internationally, using about 17 different types of satellites, AI, fusing other hydrologic and terrain data together. And that is what enables insurers to pay out automatically to any person, any entire country or public sector government of any size, and cover new people and types of risks around the world.
Great, thanks, Bessie, for that great intro into FloodBase. I'm going to jump over to you, Sieka, to share about yourself and AgriFin.
Thanks, Hetal, and thanks, Bessie, for that introduction. Insurance has a special place in my heart, especially because it's less than 3% penetration across sub-Saharan Africa. So great to see that there are new models that are making it work for a large majority of people. I'm Sieka Gatabaki. I'm the current program director for the Mercy Corps AgriFin program. What Mercy Corps AgriFin does is that it brings digital innovations to small-scale producers across the global south, ensuring that those innovations are easily adopted and meet the purpose to really support those small-scale producers to increase their productivity and incomes across the various activities that they do in the farming cycle. AgriFin really works with innovators in the space both private sector companies, public sector organizations that are really looking at cutting edge ways in which they can increase their activities with small scale producers, with a special focus around financial services to ensure that farmers get access to credit, insurance, savings, and payments that they do require to increase their productivity and incomes. I'll leave it at that and hand it over back to you, Hetal.
Thanks, Sieka. I'm going to jump over to Peter for introducing himself and his work.
Hi, thanks, Hetal, and it's great to be on this panel. So I'm Peter Rabley. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of Place, which is a data institute, if you will, with a data trust. We're a non-profit. We have 3 non-profits that are federated, that work together, one in Côte d'Ivoire, one in London, and one here in the US. The whole idea is to be minimalist in approach, to collect the lowest level of data that we can, so that our members can do something clever with the data, not us. Oftentimes, it's the need for good, curated, reliable, accurate, consistent, and repeatable data that is the root of many problems. And when we talk about data, Hetal, you open by saying there's more and more data. There is, but I would argue that most of it is not very good. And it's very hard to work with a lot of the data. And because there's so much data, you spend a lot of time and effort trying to sort out what data sets are good, what are reliable, and so on. And this is not a problem that we face necessarily just in development. This is a problem faced even by some of the largest tech companies on an ongoing basis. One of their biggest costs in business is trying to curate data. So we collect very high resolution aerial and street imagery. So our focus is on cities and peri-urban areas. We're currently operating in 6 African nations, 3 Caribbean nations, and we've just started in the Pacific. By high resolution, I mean data sets that you cannot get from satellites. So 5 centimeters, each pixel from the air is 5 centimeters. And high definition street imagery, think typically what Google Street View does. With these 2 data sets, all we do is stand it up in a very simple environment. And our members are the ones who then use these data to create value-added products, either for themselves or for the public space. So we do curate a membership. You have to be an organization in good standing in order to, quote, join the club. But the barrier to entry in the club is that you agree to terms and conditions of use and ethical use of data, and you pay $500 a year. And you get access to all the data that's in our vault. And there's no pay to play, there's no tiering or anything like that. Once in the club, you can decide if you're going to create a commercial product or a non-commercial product. If you create a non-commercial product, i.e. you derive some work and you're not going to make commercial gain, you sign a non-commercial license and you agree that your derived works are placed in the public space. If you choose the commercial option, you pay us a one-time unlock fee, and any derived works you create belong to you and you alone. And we always sign MOUs with the government, and we pay for the collection of data. We partner with government, and when we're done, they own the data. Data belongs to the government, and it's their copyright. They can do whatever they like with it. But we then get a license to put a copy in a trust, a legal trust in the UK, where it resides in perpetuity and can only be accessed by our members. In this way, we deal with the data sovereignty question, because the original data is in the country and it's only a copy that's in the cloud. It also acts as a free backup for the government as well. So that's it. That's what we do. We focused on cities because, particularly in Africa, they're growing so quickly and the problems are profound, and there is so little data for the cities. We also feel that there are lots of data sets and technologies, particularly open data sets, that service rural and agricultural communities quite well. And the same is not true within cities. So thank you, Hetal.
Thanks, Peter. Bessie, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you not hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Bessie. There we go. A little delay.
Okay, there we go. We had some technology glitches. No problem. So Bessie, I was going to come to you and actually ask you, having heard, especially where Peter's that vision is going with data and your journey, kind of what is the current landscape of climate smart data? And what's available? What's the cost and quality? As a founder who's constantly, I assume, kind of refining the product and trying to bring these services, especially insurance as a financial service, to people.
I'd love to talk by way of the whole landscape, and then I can focus specifically on flooding, which is really our area of expertise. But in the past 10 years that we've been building the company, the landscape has, I think, changed dramatically and is growing exponentially. I think, interestingly enough, over this 10-year period, and certainly even before that, I think a lot of the same larger questions are ultimately the same. I'll maybe break this down into maybe a couple of areas, sure, not comprehensive, but climate modeling, so predicting where risk is going to be in the future, is very different than predicting present day risk by specific types of climate perils, so flooding, fires, drought, etc. That is what we do on flooding, is what is the risk today in this particular area, whether it's vulnerable to a 5-year flood, a 100-year flood, a 1,000-year flood in this area, versus saying, hey, in 25 years, 100 years, is this area going to become riskier or become in risk? So that would be climate scenarios. Even just each of the perils for today's risk, let alone future projections, very different types of science that requires unique data. Some of the data sets will be inputs will be shared, but quite unique. We then, I think, when we talk about climate smart data, we do also think about the data that goes into the solutions. So things like carbon monitoring, and there's a lot of interest and I think a lot of controversy right now about the quality of that work. And the effectiveness, especially in the developing world, around the sequestration programs. And I think that there's, I think, a lot of really good work in the academic literature about that. So the world has changed quite a bit. I think many of the ultimate questions remain the same, which is interesting. So is this particular property going to be at X risk from a climate disaster in 100 years? That question, in many ways, has been guiding a lot of the science. And frankly, I think we're getting closer and closer to that. I think the models for future climate are getting better and better with more data, better models. But I think we have a lot of work to go before we get down to a property level prediction of future flood risk. And I think for anyone who's a consumer of that information, whether the United States or Cote d'Ivoire, I think make sure that you are really reading up on the inputs that go into whatever model provider you're using or whomever you're using to consult with that. And I would just say anything that doesn't come with a healthy amount of uncertainty around the conclusions, I would just run the opposite direction from that. Just that's the current state of the science. Probably healthy to do anywhere, but definitely in science modeling. Hetal, if it makes sense, I'm happy to share a little bit more about flooding in particular, if that makes sense for you.
Yeah, let's see, given the time, maybe I'll come back to that as we're looking forward and how you think about flooding and other solutions in the next question. I'm going to jump to Sieka, especially because given AgriFin's reach and where you're looking at where the platform's going, what are the specific or like real world, say, especially around financial inclusion applications, is the team thinking of, especially around, you know, access to services and financial services for women in the food systems? I know there's a lot of conversation in our space in the ecosystem on unlocking finance, especially for women. But I know it's also related to assessing risk, which goes back to the things Peter and Bessie were talking about. So what are your views on this, and what is AgriFin looking at?
Yeah, Hetal, and you hit the nail on the head in terms of assessing risk. I think there's been a big challenge in terms of increasing access and usage of financial services across the global south. And what we're seeing is that with this new access to climate data, or with the increasing access to climate data, we're seeing new models and new approaches towards investigating and identifying probabilities of repayment. We, in the recent past, have worked with some companies that are playing around or testing soil fertility models that use remote sensing data to build solutions that can provide farmers with a credit risk profile based on the usage of their fertilizer, based on the current state of the climate, etc. And we've got companies like Apollo that are testing this solution to see whether they can actually bring their probabilities of default a lot lower and educate the way that support farmers with credit for inputs of various kinds and ensure that they get paid back at the end of the season. We've also seen, and I think Bessie will talk a lot about in the insurtech space, but we also seen that insurance companies, again, that are looking at different parametric insurance models, whether it's weather-based index insurance or yield models, that are also consuming a lot of this climate data to kind of reduce the cost of acquiring information that allows them to then make the insurance products a lot more affordable for this different markets, and then reduce some of the risks that are therein when you don't have this access to these kinds of pieces of data. Then we've actually seen financial institutions that are actually managing and looking at remote sensing data to help them with pre-loan assessment and also help them through the growing season so that they can evaluate their portfolios to ensure that the probability of repayment still remains, that those farms that they've supported with various financial services are able to repay for those services in the long run. So there are a myriad of ways in which we're seeing climate data being utilized right across the agricultural value chain, from production up to harvesting.
Great, thanks. I'm going to pull us then purposely into the urban sphere, where I think it's, and go to Peter in how I know they're looking at mapping specifically urban, the cities are growing. So I'm also interested to hear, like, what would be a state, like what are the types of solutions you think that can unlock? And I come at this from knowing that I've over the last year been looking at a lot of research around MSME shops and the impact of climate and floods on their value chain, on their supply chains, on their incomes. Most of these shops, 60-70% are women owned. There's 44 million of them across the continent. And so one specific example of how climate impact on urban space, but so I know there's a multitude ways to look at it, so I'm interested to hear how Peter thinks about it.
Well, I think what Bessie did is useful and helpful to start all the way at the top and sort of slice things. So climate is not monolithic, and climate is the measurement of weather over time, right? And location. So if we think about climate mitigation and climate adaptation as the first way to take a path, I think mitigation, as it's defined now, which is about either reduction, removal, protection, and expansion, if you will, around carbon emissions and methane particularly. I think that world is well serviced and has lots of specialists who know exactly what they're doing and have access to high compute and know how to use it. And so I would say, for the most part, that's not where I would put my eggs, and that's not where I would put my development focus. And that led us to cities, which is where we talk about adaptation, cities and small island states, because adaptation is where the rubber hits the road. This is where communities who mostly have not had any inputs into the climate situation are now facing the increasing perils. And we've heard of flood being one, but I would add that both wind and heat, particularly heat, And I was interested to read about a new, talking about parametric insurance products, a new heat product for women, in particular in Rajasthan recently, which is a parametric-based insurance product. But as you get into the urban sphere, the opportunities for how you use data to measure the potential impact and the current impact of weather on habitat and where you work. So as you know, I bristle, and I guess my age and experience allows me to be the kind of crusty old man in the room and say, I really don't like terms like climate smart and other things, because it tends to detract from the problem at hand, which is that people are affected by increasing weather events where they work and where they live. And this is particularly true in cities. So I think by providing more data, one can look at, how do I remediate heat? If I live in an urban slum, my biggest problem is a tin roof. If I replace my tin roof, I can reduce the heat in my dwelling by anywhere between 8 and 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you track wet bulb temperature, which is the combination of humidity and heat, which is ultimately the thing at the point at which your body can no longer sweat and cool itself, your body begins to break down. And particularly for older but younger, wet bulb really affects things. But it affects women particularly, who are out in markets and selling. And so how do you then reduce the impact of heat in an urban space where buildings tend to focus and concentrate additional heat? Cement buildings and asphalt retain the heat. It doesn't cool at night. So these are simple physical characteristics that are being increased for more humans packed into more tight space. And there are physical remediations. So in terms of financial inclusion, you could imagine, what are the opportunities? Do I have a product for upgrading the dwellings? Do I replace the tin? You know, do I put more airflow in? Do I get fans? So these are some of the opportunities potentially that come, but the data that you can provide to organizations that can find out either manually or through a machine that says, how many tin roofs in this area, and therefore how many people are affected, and what's my potential market? All these things become available in the urban space. So again, I think defining what you mean by climate, who it affects, where it affects, and how it affects, and then the data sets that are available to help you come up with an entrepreneurial opportunity to try and resolve it.
One other thing to just add in there is also thinking more deeply about what we mean by risk when we talk about climate data to match risk. So I really like Peter's point about thinking more deeply and in a more complex way, and not just kind of shoving into a monolith as we think about applications on the ground to affect those who are actually using this and the impact we want to have. But something you said, Peter, really made me think about what disruptions actually mean and look like after various different climate disasters, and particularly in the urban space where societies and people's interdependencies are so complex. Risk is far beyond just property damage, which in our space, when thinking about insurance, the gap is massive, especially in the African continent. All of that existing insurance market is really about, for property and casualty damage, around property damage. When we all know that not just the damage to your property, but your ability to go to and from work, to get critical medical supplies, your ability to evacuate, your ability to just move around is paramount to your ability to survive a shock. To just survive, but to not go fall into bankruptcy, slip into poverty, these various things. And so I am very excited about, particularly in my space, parametric insurance, being able to insure against and then help reduce risk for a more realistic sense of what it is that impacts someone after a disaster and even ahead of time.
This is great. I love a panel when we're already going into my next question without me having to jump in there. Which is gonna, so I'm gonna see, I'm gonna come to you, and I'm gonna let Bessie or Peter close also. Yeah, where is your exciting place then in terms of the future, and where you think opportunities lie, either from ideas of founders that AgriFin's are working with now, or other research or ideas that are coming up on your, or even from other people?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that we've observed with climate data is that it's one of the factors that will start to reduce gender biases, or reduce the gender gap, because the data is non-biased. I mean, if you're going to know information about whether extreme weather conditions are going to hit a particular agricultural space, it's not gender specific. So financial institutions that are taking up this data and have a new point to actually then develop products that are best suited across the market and are tailored for all small scale farmers writ large. So I do see that it's one of the driving forces that will reduce those biases, and have products that are created to serve at least the women small scale farmers as well, that have been really underserved with financial products. The other point I was going to make, and it's great that that Peter is working on the place solution, is that we've been seeing that a lot of data has been siloed in the past. There's no one who's really aggregating information and making it used for purpose. So I definitely see that there is a drive towards more aggregation of this data, and as this data is aggregated, then also creating mechanisms for sharing of information, so that innovators can then share this information to create their different products and services for the market. There have been challenges around sharing information. A lot of the organizations that collect the data do not want to share that data without a monetization pathway. So Peter has really talked about one of the ways that which that can be done. I'm really glad to see that. And we're seeing that happening to some degree. And the other point that Peter mentioned was actually the last one that I was going to state, is that we're seeing increased public sector involvement in actual data collection. And many times we're seeing them starting to build out public goods around the data that's collected. That's really spurring and increasing innovation in the space, which we hope will spur on a lot more products that will serve the various consumers, be it urban or rural, with various solutions and data-driven services.
Great, thanks. Peter, I'm going to come to you for a last word on where you see the space going. What would you want to inspire founders who are thinking about an idea right now? They're even pre-MVP. Basically, give me an investment pipeline.
Well, I think where I see things going, I do see the role, and I'm excited about a role of new organizations, new institutional structures that sit in between public and private around data. We should be more upfront about saying that it's just not feasible for certain governments, and even it's more difficult even for governments in the US and Europe to continue to stay apace with technological change and produce all of the data they may have produced in the past. So there's pressure and strain, and there's more failed public goods, if you will. But there's a role for essential goods that are really natural monopolies. These are data sets that are relied on because they're curated, and they help spur innovation and opportunity for others. And on the other hand, if that type of data is monopolized and captured solely by a private entity, then that is highly restrictive and not good for society and where we want to go. So this notion of an institution that can sit in between, service a public good function in a trusted way, and make that data available as frictionless as possible and as low cost as possible, to allow innovation in commercial space. And I'm really stressing this, that it has to give as much commercial opportunity as opportunities for civil society organizations, research, and so forth. I'm very excited about that type of structure, and I think you will see more of that around core data sets. We simply will. I think the thing I'm most excited about with our own data set that we unleash is, and I would push back a little bit, I think actually women's opportunities in cities are deeply stunted because of the way that women naturally see cities and how they are able to move or not move through cities because of security concerns and other concerns. And understanding women's living and mobility constraints within a city, which is more possible now with the type of data that we're making available, I think there's tremendous opportunity to offer solutions, whether it's mobility safety, mobility opportunities. Can women take jobs that are a little further away? How do they get there, etc.? Understanding the urban space and understanding women's constraints as a result of the unique environment of an urban space, I think there's tremendous opportunity there, and we haven't even scratched the surface because we know so little about that. You know, if I'm looking at deal flow again, as I tell any entrepreneur, what problem are you solving and whose problem is it, and are they going to pay you for it? Simple as that.
Well, they should all listen up. Bessie, one quick last word or anything else that you want to say before we have to shut down?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have to jump in on what these two just said. I completely agree with what Peter just laid out here. You know, when I started my career as a community organizer working in climate vulnerable communities, primarily in Florida, in the United States, and I won't say how long ago this was, but it was very clear that access to information about your vulnerability was paramount for them to advocate for what they needed. And so now, you know, many years later, I'm very excited about continuing to push the edge around, you know, the very particular peril that we are focused on. We're continuously monitoring floods around the world. It's hourly, all the time in the US. Internationally, it's daily, but we hope to get better and better on that. But I have to say, after 10 years of building this, working with humanitarian organizations and global reinsurers, the thing I am personally most excited about is the financial innovations that are going to go on top of all of this data. So it's been very clear that just access to information, so the communities I was working in when I started my career, the governments that FloodBase has serviced over 10 years, the individual farmers who have our insurance, it's not just access to data. It's not just knowing I am climate vulnerable. I am highly exposed to a flood. A heat wave is surely to hit my community. Access to information is incredibly valuable, does not matter unless you match it with the resources that the person, the business, the government needs to adapt to the next disaster as it's coming, ahead of time, and then as they think about the next, you know, decades, hundreds of years of this, what's the future for them. So I am really excited about the ways in which public sector, private sector actually working together to create new solutions that access financial. So whether this is debt relief for smallholder farmers when they take out their annual loans. And so Sieka, I was thinking about you and some of the programs we're doing in Colombia and some of the other really cool stuff that I know you guys support. Climate debt relief for sovereign debt. So things like what Mia Motley is advocating for, and I think is paramount for development to financing to continue, supply chain protection, a number of other, I think, really cool innovations that we just desperately need to scale, that the private sector is thrilled to engage in from a financial stability, a balance sheet perspective from them, a marketing share increase from them, and I think is critical. So I guess the last thing I'll leave on is, in many ways, I think the climate challenge, certainly around adaptation, probably around mitigation too, is largely a financial challenge. How do we finance both the reduction of this problem, and how do we finance people from some of the most vulnerable to, frankly, some of the richest to be able to withstand the shocks that we have today? And that is the data paired with more creative solutions that actually take advantage of it and give people the resources that they need.
Great. Well, I think that's a great way to end this panel. Thank you all so much for your time and sharing your experience. And yeah, look forward to hearing more about all of your work, and hopefully you get a lot of people reaching out from this panel.
Thank you.
you.
It's been
Thank you.
Thank you.